If you want to grow a seven-figure business in 2024, everything is going to have to be thrown at that. Knowledge is not the issue. Applied knowledge is the issue. Learning to apply the knowledge you already have can dramatically change your life. After I've made the connections, what next?
Good day, everybody, and thank you for joining us today on the GLIT podcast. The GLIT podcast is a global leadership, innovation, and tech podcast where we interview thought leaders who share their perspectives on various issues across leadership, innovation, and technology. This is the Hello 2024 series, in which we work on planning for the new year. In this series, we have 4 modules, which include the tech, the business, the leadership, and the career modules. Today, we will be having the career module, and my guest is Mosope Adeyemi. Mosope is a former banker, and she used to be an executive director with Goldman Sachs. In fact, she's had an amazing career where she has worked with a lot of Fortune 500 banks in the UK. She has packed with her about 17 years of financial advice, financial planning, and financial strategy experience. And when you talk about planning, one of the best people to talk to is the people who count the money. So today, Mary will be telling us about how to plan for your career. She's also a career coach and author of the book titled Visible Strengths, which is a template for how you should excel in your career. In Mosope's program, she helps people identify their whys, identify what they are doing in their careers, identify how they are going to excel in their career, and how they would do very well either to get the next promotion, earn more, pivot in their career, or just invariably become much better. So she's going to be talking with me for the next few minutes on how to plan your career for the new year and how to make sure you ace it. That is how to make sure that you just get it right this time. And we are going to have this wonderful conversation across various issues. And I hope that you have the best of times today. Welcome, Mary. And let's make sure that everybody can hear you. And let's tell us how happy you are to be here today.
Hi, Tosi. Thanks for having me. It's excellent to be here. Hi, everyone listening, and Happy New Year. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation. So yeah, I'm really, really excited to be here. First time, shall I say first 2024 podcast, shall we say? So it's kicking off already. And yeah, let's see what this conversation unpacks.
Okay, beautiful. And as a career expert, what typically would be at the back of your mind at the end of the year? You know, sometimes we have people whose end of year is summer, which is June, July. Sometimes we have people whose end of year is the calendar year. But regardless of when the end of the financial year is, everybody still respects the calendar year one way or the other because it's the end of the year. So in career, what typically should be at the bottom of one's mind or top of one's mind as the calendar year comes to an end?
Good question. I think I'm definitely I'm someone that's of the school of thought that year ends are just markers. It's not like you wake up the next day and it's suddenly a new century and a new world. It's just tomorrow. But it's always they're good mental inflection points, you know. New year 2024 starts on a Monday, but yesterday was 2023, but it was just Sunday. Like nothing's really necessarily moved, but it's a good point to stop and say, hey, if I was thinking about life in seasons, which we should, there are certain time markers that are helpful times to pause, reflect, re-energize and reset and just kind of, move on to the next thing you want to get done. So I love doing these types of exercises or reflections, usually, birthdays, which are basically your own personal new year. Obviously, the actual sort of calendar year is a good time as well. And given that, where activities tend to ease down a little bit, it gives you that opportunity to really take a breather and reset. I think it's always a good time. So when I think about for me, when I end the new year, I'm always focused on rest. That's always one of the big things. I think if you're a high performance individual at work, it can just always feel like a very long marathon it's a long marathon with multiple sprints and no rest, what feels like no rest. And so the end of the year is always a good time to really just, go a little bit inside of yourself, rest, reconnect with family, friends, whatever, people that you just haven't been able to spend time with, and just, do that. But I also love taking the time to do some reflections. And I think as it pertains to career, I love to really think around a few questions. I love to really think about what am I most proud of? I like to be quite strengths focused, and, start with my highs. What am I most proud of? What have I accomplished this year? What was that? What was the one thing I said I wanted to do this year and I did? And so that's always my big thing, kind of starting with those sort of key accomplishments. And accomplishments, they are as personal as they need to be. They don't need to be revolutionary. I think it's really just, what is that one thing that you set your sights on to do, and how far into it did you get? Is always the one question that I like to reflect on. And then also I always like to reflect on, so what is the one thing that I learned about myself this year? Because I think we're always evolving. And so sometimes you might just have exposed an area of yourself that you didn't think was there. And it may be a good area, it might be an area of development. What's the one area that, you feel like this was a bit of a surprise to you, or something you learned about yourself? And I would then say, the other question I like to think about is, what did I not achieve that I maybe might have wanted to, but I didn't quite get to it? And then the more important part of that question is then, well, what was the obstacle that was in my way? And I think that tends to uncover a lot of things. Sometimes there are external obstacles. I didn't have the finances. I didn't have the support. I didn't have the network. I didn't have this. But a lot of times you also find that internal obstacles. I gave into fear. I was overthinking. I micromanaged myself. Other priorities came up. There are lots of other things. And I think those are sort of three key buckets that I always like to spend time on at the end of the year. But to be fair, I think I probably spend time on that every month. It's not something that necessarily has to be just one point of the year, but just every month, even just thinking, what am I most proud of? What did I tick off in my to-do list? What did I find out about myself this year? And also, what were some of the obstacles I had to face that stopped me from doing what I wanted to do? So a bit of a long answer, but it's just sort of how I think about that point of the year, in between sleeping and resting and recovering, of course.
Beautiful. So do you personally have any achievements this year?
Do I personally have? Yeah. Quite a few. When I think about 2023, it was a massive transition year for me. And on one hand, it felt like I was progressing in a regressed fashion. It's a very weird oxymoron of emotions, but it was one of those years where I have been meaning to step out of the game court of, being a finance professional, being a risk manager. I've been doing that work for the last 15 years and doing it really successfully, working with some of the largest banks in the world. I had a significant portfolio that I was managing, love my job, love what I do, but I also knew I was at a point where I wanted to do something different and live a different life and impact differently. And I wanted to take that time for myself, spend time with my family, but also to grow my coaching practice, which is what I'm doing now. So 2023 was the year that I made that step, which felt like sort of 5 years in the making, I would say, or even 7 years in the making. But I finally took the leap, did the resignation, stepped out, all of the things. That was probably, by far one of the biggest accomplishments that I, finally said yes to myself and a desire that has been there for quite some time. And finding the courage, because it's not easy to do that, especially in this economy, but with that also like unpacked a whole host of things, overcoming internal fears, having different levels of conversations. One of the big things I think for me was the level at which I invested in my self-development this year has been astronomical. When I pull the bank accounts and I think about what I spent the most on, I realize I spent so much on like personal development and business growth. And I think that that's something that I'm super proud of, because it's so easy to want to do it alone. It's so easy to want to do trial and error. It's so easy to kind of lose sight of, getting the support you need in transitions. And I think that that was definitely something that I leaned a lot into. Like I spent thousands of pounds, 5-figure pounds, thousands of it, just really getting myself into the space that I need to be. So lots of things to be proud of. But I think for me, it was just a massive transition year, the biggest transition I've had maybe ever my life. So yeah.
You're saying invariably, even though you have been quite accomplished in your career, professional career, you still have to do some good investments to jumpstart your new coaching business career.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's like, in business, we talk about sort of the learning curve. Every time something is new, you start a new learning curve. The new learning curve might be on a higher plane than the old learning curve, but you're still going to start from the beginning. So you're not starting from scratch, you're starting from experience, but you need to, I always say, the things that you don't respect are the things that will bite you. So you always have to respect every new season, every new process, and don't assume you know it. I think when you give everything its due respect, then they won't disappoint you and they won't scratch you, So I think I'm just someone that, and I'm a learner by nature. So I think every time, which is a bit of a good and a bad thing, has its both sides of the coin. But the point is really that if it's something new, give yourself the best shot of being successful by not assuming you know it all, by, looking for the communities that can help you, looking for the programs that can support you. And then also, I think it's just about working smarter, not harder. The season of working hard and learning everything on your own, you don't have to do that, especially at this point in my career as a senior level career transition. I can definitely lean in on other people's experiences and be more efficient. Be more efficient in my own process than trying to basically gather all the information on my own, right? So that was definitely like a big one.
Beautiful.
For me.
Thank you so much. Beautiful. So how do you recommend that people should set their career goals at the beginning of the year? Now, maybe not necessarily just for the new calendar year, but again, what is your best recommendation or best approach for setting career goals, and what kind of career goals should one be setting?
Good question. Can be quite a long answer, but I think what I would always say before I then get into sort of the what goals should you set is, number one, really just think about yourself. The first thing, like, where are you in this whole thing? So a little bit of a self check-in, with before goal setting is important. I think like self-awareness is just that catalyst for everything that we need to achieve in your career, right? So before you get down to, okay, what do I want? It's almost like, where am I? Whatever, again, that sort of reflection we talked about at the beginning, where am I in all of this now? What is the most important thing in this phase for me? And I think that's the jumping board you start to set goals on. There's no point setting goals relating to, for example, maybe there's no point setting goals relating to like promotion or changing careers if you know that your life sort of focus is maybe on expanding your family Now, those two things are not mutually exclusive. You can, get promoted whilst trying to find family. But again, it's a mental, you always have to judge, like, where do I want to spend my energy? Do I want to spend my energy personally? Do I want to spend my energy professionally? Or do I want to do both? I think it's just important to check in with yourself to say, where am I? What does this year represent? What has the last year been? Am I in a driving season, or am I in a resting season? It's difficult to have the same seasons repeated, the same season continue endlessly. There usually is there's a moment of acceleration and deceleration always, and that plateau season. Always just identifying, where am I in all of this? And then what are the goals that will align with the place that I'm at? So I think definitely starting there. And then also, if you are someone who works in an organization, I think definitely what I call sort of strategic goal alignment is an important piece as well. So if you're choosing to be successful in a particular organization, a lot of the goals that you will set, in particular some of your performance goals, will really be around driving the agenda of the organization, and then as a byproduct, driving your own agenda and your own growth. So I always say, paying attention to what are the key strategic objectives of the organization that you're in. What is the company trying to achieve across, across people, across products, across profit, across purpose, across process. What are they trying to get done, and how can you apply yourself to supporting that? Is always I always say, like, keep the organizational goals very, very clear. So we started with basically saying, where am I right now? What are my personal goals? And then what are my organization's goals? So if you're looking at that platform as sort of like your starting point, then everything else then kind of now stacks on top of it. And so, I teach in my classes a lot that, there are generally 7 sort of key goal areas that you should be thinking about every year. Some I've sort of touched on already, but, you should definitely be having your performance goals. Like, how is the performance going to change? Or how do I intend to improve my performance in this year vis-a-vis what I was doing last year? And that could be in relation to maybe you got a promotion. So maybe you got a promotion. How does that translate into sort of a new level of performance for you? So performance goals are definitely one. Your learning goals are always another. You should always have a learning agenda. The goals pertaining to the relationships you want to build or foster, whether in your organization or outside your organization, are also key. How you want to be more visible, so it's basically your exposure goals. How do you want to tell your story in this year? Then I always think about my progression goals. And I use the word progression intentionally, not promotion, because promotion sometimes is always a big focus, but I think you can have multiple layers of progression even before a promotion comes, a formal promotion. Then of course, I always want to know about my money. So my money goals, or my earning goals, or my side hustling goals, or basically how am I going to end with a bank account that's better than the bank account I'm ending on this year? And also, like, very, very big for me and my heart, and I always say, like, for people that I work with is, what are your giving goals? How are you going to give back, in your community, to your mentees, people around you, so that you don't have a year that is all about what you are doing. So that could also include, like, how am I going to serve in church, or in my local community, or, with my family, whatever it is. How am I going to basically give back of the abundance that I have, that I've received? How can I give back to kind of always create space for more? So so that's just a really quick summary of some of the thinking that you should be having around sort of goal setting.
Beautiful. I like that. I like the fact that you have broken it. And I think the fact that you said, so if I'm having a baby, or if I'm getting married, and a couple of things, which is a phenomenal or major change in my personal life, I should learn that maybe, while also asking for a progression or a promotion, may not necessarily be realistic. But again, that is really critical. I mean, this is the first time I'm hearing that, because typically every year you are working for a promotion or a progression, and you are not telling yourself that, okay, if I'm getting married in May, I need to slow down May to June or May to July, or if I'm having a baby for the first 60 to 90 days, I'm going to slow down in this period. So I'm going to deliberately deflect projects or whatever, if possible, at that period, because I know what is going to happen. And then after the 60 to 90 days, I can accelerate back, or I'm just going to take this year off and be coasting, but obviously, but make sure that I progress in other areas. It could be while this is happening, I could take a program, I could take a course or something like that.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I like the school of thinking, and that's very, 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 very good. I said very like 7 times, and that is how it feels to me. Beautiful. Yes. Okay. So when you come to skill development, what kind of goals or what plans should we have for skill development? Should it always be the next master's? What are the various opportunities we have for skill development that somebody could engage in? We know it's always learning, but what really is learning, and what should be the base or bedrock of that learning endeavor and learning planning?
That's a great question. I was thinking about that recently, in particular around like just basically how we learn in general. And so if we were to kind of take maybe a leap from that, I mean, basically how do we learn in general, right? You can learn through reading, right? So that's sometimes what feels like low level learning, but you can learn a lot through reading. You can learn a lot through just, whether it's reading books, reading articles, reading whatever it is, there's a lot of information out there, lots of things on the internet. So definitely just reading widely is a way to learn. I guess let me even take a step back, right? So before you start creating your learning agenda or your learning pathways, is really thinking about how do you want to grow? What exactly do you want to learn? And that can then dictate the content and then the process of that learning. So is it that you want to gain knowledge, which means that from where you are now, maybe you have a technical knowledge gap. So that, okay, that is a clear knowledge gap, maybe something that you need to go and upskill in maybe you need to go and get a qualification, or or you're trying to get a particular job that requires a qualification. Then it means like the way you're going to learn or the way you're going to acquire that knowledge is to go through a formal setting so you can get the certification. So I would say, again, it always comes back down to what are we trying to achieve, and then how do you get there? So if what you're trying to achieve is formal qualification or formal certification, then there's a defined path for that. If it is something that has to do with improving your technical skills, then usually is a defined path for that. If it's something that has to do with your professional competencies, maybe upskilling, improving something that you maybe already have, a skill you already have, but you're not yet able to use it to its full capacity, then there is, again, a different layer of learning for that. And then if it's something to do with not necessarily taking in knowledge, but more around implementation of knowledge, then instead of taking on more workshops, it can be something around doing more coaching. So again, breaking things down into, what is the end goal of this learning process, defining that, and then saying, okay, what is now the best approach? Yeah. So if we are I need to acquire knowledge, I need to get a specific certification, you would probably be looking at training, courses, workshops, that type of thing, probably with formal organization, so you can acquire the certification that you need, right? You need the paper at the end, right? So that's the pathway that you'll be looking at. So definitely more formal qualifications. If it's around upskilling or maybe practical use of a skill or skill improvement, then that could be something, maybe formal and informal. There are multiple different types of programs out there that would help you with your communication, that will help you with your sales, influencing and impact, so depending on sort of the areas. And some of these areas that you need to develop, this is where you have to pay attention to maybe feedback. So both your self-reflection, but also feedback. So when you're getting to that year-end process, what was the thing that people kept on repeatedly saying you needed to improve? right? That's always a good question to ask. If someone says, I think you really need to, lean into leveraging your team more, that maybe delegation is an area of improvement. Or I think I would want you to step up and be a more formidable leader. Maybe it's your leadership style that needs to be improved. Or someone says to you that, I think you could really help, you would do a lot better if you understood sort of modeling a little bit more or coding a little bit more. It's a technical issue. So pay attention to the feedback that's coming to you, because I think that definitely shows where the gaps might be. And then you can also help you build that learning agenda. But then there's also that area of what I think is like coaching. So it's not that you don't have the knowledge, but a lot of times, knowledge is not the issue. Applied knowledge is the issue. We can know a lot of things, but are you using the knowledge you have to do anything? And a lot of times that's where we have sort of the support of sort of accountability coaching, I think, can really help, where it's saying, hey, this thing, but how are you applying it to your everyday? How are you taking the steps? Have you actually booked the course? Are you attending? How are you applying your learnings in your day-to-day? That can dramatically, learning to apply the knowledge you already have can dramatically change your life without learning anymore. And I think that's always one thing I would say, like, before we continue to add more MBAs, add another certification, it's almost like, what are you doing with the knowledge you already have? I think 2024 is a big year for stewardship. It's a big year for really thinking about what is already in your hand, what's the oil in your house, for using the sort of a biblical reference, but it's sort of, what is the thing that is already with you, and how can you leverage that to achieve the next thing that you want to. So I think, a bit of a scattered way of answering it, but if I was to summarize, I would say identify where the gaps are and the type of learning you need to undertake, then work backwards to now saying, okay, what are the pathways to achieve this particular thing, right? Is it formal learning? Is it informal learning? Is it accountability coaching? I think that by the time you do that, those options generally work for you.
Beautiful. I like the part where you mentioned the experiential, because it's one thing to know, and then it's another thing to do. And if you are not doing, it's usually going to be a major issue, because sometimes people don't want to see what you've learned, or they don't want to see what you've acquired in terms of knowledge. They want to see what you have done. So yes, doing part, either coaching or professional internship. Some organizations have cross deployments, whatever, should be something that one can embrace to be able to have that learning solidified.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So when it comes to networking and the responsible relationship building, what do you think people should be doing? But before we go into networking and relationship building, you mentioned something for me which is critical, which is very fundamental. You said people should do like a reality check. That reality check is something I need you to expatiate upon, because one thing I've come to discover is we have a lot of people who are probably not certain that they're in the right job. They are not certain that they're doing the right things. So what can we do really to do that reality check to ensure we are in the right place and doing the right things? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes. So I would say, we should always be having a reality check. We should always be, and by reality check, what that basically means is always stop and always take time out to stop and reconnect with yourself, and ask yourself with a position of flexibility, am I in the best place I can possibly be based on the goals that I have for myself? And it's a question that is set up that way because it respects the evolution of life, that the path you might have been taking when you were 16 is not the path that you're going to be taking at 35 or at 50. because life is happening, things are changing, priorities are switching. And so, and priorities are switching in minutes, not even in days or months or years anymore. It's happening in real time. As we're getting more experience and getting more exposure, it's always important to really stop and think, okay, how is my internal change affecting my desires, and how are the external changes affecting my desires? So all those things matter. So yes, I think it's always so important to do that. And so even as and a big part of when I said, like, before you start goal setting and deciding, really figure out, where am I? That's basically that reality check, right?
All right. So like you mentioned, there are times for people to pause, and there are times for people to do reflection. What are the necessary reflections one should be doing? Yes, we've done the looking back into the year. Yes, we've done all your goal counting and your celebration and all that. However, what other assessments and reflections should someone be doing in the new year? Maybe in terms of validation, maybe in terms of awareness, maybe in terms of check marks or check boxes to ensure that, okay, now I think we are good, then we can plan. Are there any recommendations that you have? And you probably don't know this in your program, but are there any recommendations that help me to check myself in my career, help me to analyze and assess myself to ensure that I'm still on the right path? And then I can now lean forward, I can now jump forward, I can now jump higher to become where I want to be.
Yeah. No, really, really powerful question. I think what you're asking for kind of sounds to me like what I will call always sort of, I guess, your alignment checkers. Am I in an aligned place? Now, a lack of alignment usually feels like, a lot of people don't use that word, but I think what it tends to feel like, and what my clients always say to me when it's always an alignment question, is this big word of, I feel unhappy, or I feel unsettled, or I feel unfulfilled. There's always sort of words that starts with an on something. And so that generally tends to be a sense of misalignment. You can be misaligned with your strengths, right? So you could be in a career, for example, where you feel tired every day, you feel drained every day. And that probably means that you are not leveraging things, you're not using your best self at work. Or you are using too much of your weakeners, what I call your weakeners or your drainers at work. And so that's always a question is, do you always feel tired? If you're always feeling tired, always feeling exhausted, then it might mean that you're doing a job that generally is a drainer and not something that leverages your strengths. I think thinking about sort of, am I in the right place for my career? Like, am I in the right job? So that's definitely one thing to consider. If you are somebody who, like, on Sundays, you have what I call the Sunday scaries, which means like Sunday evening, you're just dreading Monday. You're just thinking, oh my God, here we go again. And work is always work. And of course, we can always just opt out and, watch Netflix all day. But work should not be anxiety inducing. It should be a healthy challenge, but it should not be bringing up thoughts of, like, anxious thoughts, I think. And there's a difference. So when you start feeling like real anxious thoughts of, when you start fantasizing about being fired, or about being ill, or about, something going wrong so you don't have to show up at work, then there's a big sort of misalignment sort of question. So I think some of the intrinsic checkers for yourself is, am I actually happy doing what I'm doing? Do I feel excited when I think about what I do every single day? Do I like the people that I work with? Because sometimes it's not the role that's misaligned, it's the actual, maybe the company. It might be the company in terms of the company values, the kind of people you work with, the boss that you have. Do I enjoy the relationships around me? Do I have friendships that friendships or relationships at work that I like, that support me, and people that I actually like to see every day? Because sometimes it's not the job, it's the people, it's the culture, it's the environment. So do I like the environment that I'm in? Then as it then pertains to you also think about, is this aligned to who you're becoming, right? So you're always evolving. As I said, you're always evolving, and it's important to always check that the job that you got 3 years ago is aligned with the person that you have become over those 3 years. And it may not always be the same. So it's just really being able to say okay, am I leaning more into a different type of work? Am I somebody who maybe because of a personal event, I'm now someone that really, really prioritizes my health? So I'll give a personal example, right? So, I've always been a banker. I've always worked really long hours, excruciatingly long hours, consistently. And that's basically how I have grown up in my career. But I've also had seasons where both myself and close family members had really difficult health conditions that caused everybody to have to reassess what is most important and make certain changes. So, those kind of things can happen. So, family events, deaths in the family, things like that made me have to prioritize, the work that I was doing needed to have more flexibility, in it. It needed to have more, I needed to be paid more. So I could afford to basically travel a lot. So I needed to be paid more. I needed to have more flexibility. I needed to have more ability to work from home, go for hospital appointments, different things like that. So I think, again, I had to really consider at the time, is the job that I'm in aligned with this new focus on health and wellness that I needed to have, so I could actually survive the year and be alive to tell the tale, right? I had to really think about that. Now that seems like a really extreme example, but maybe other softer examples could be, hey, this year you got married. Does this job work for the new state of life that you're in? This year you became a mom or a dad. Does this job align with that new set of responsibilities? This year you lost a parent. Now you have another parent maybe who's now on their own and requires a lot more support. Are you able to afford to be a caretaker? And so on and so forth. There are many people who had to transition into caretaker roles, especially post-COVID. What does that actually mean for, then also there's also alignment around the economy, the evolution of the economy, the way the numbers are working. Can I afford to continue working in this low paying job, or do I need to really be looking for something else? So there's that. There's also alignment with the evolution of the market, right? There are many people who are doing jobs today that are effectively being made redundant. In the next, there's research that suggests that 80% of the jobs that would exist in 2030 don't even exist today. So that statistic can be quite interesting, because it says, it means that there's a whole future of work that is happening, that's going to happen over the next 6 to 10 years that we can't even see today. But there's also a dissemination of the jobs that we see today will no longer exist in 6 to 10 years. So that also means that it's important to always be thinking, how is the future of work evolving? Where am I in that mix? Do I have skills that are going to become redundant? Am I building skills for the future? You also should be thinking about, are there emerging technologies or emerging industries that are basically going to wipe out my job? And, how can I make myself and keep myself, what I call still in demand, regardless of this evolution, right? So back to the question around your learning agenda. That's one of the areas you have to be thinking about in your learning agenda, is how am I keeping myself prepared for this sort of new future of work. So there are lots of sort of alignment questions. There are lots of alignment questions that you always have to think about. Am I internally, intrinsically happy at my job? Do I like people that I work with? So is it a cultural or organizational issue? If I'm happy with those, then you have to be thinking about, am I prepared for the future of work? Am I well placed in this economy that I'm in? Or has my life changed in such a way that it's going to cause a change in my job? So there are a number of areas. So it seems like a simple question, but it's actually quite a complex one, because you have to really delve into various areas and really think, okay, almost like you ask yourself questions in this area, you tick the box, you move on to the next thing. And so, yeah, it's always a bit of a therapy session when you're going through alignment questioning, because you just have to really look at different areas and then come up with that sort of holistic piece. Yeah.
So do you have a template for this?
Do I have a template for this? Sort of.
Okay, so thank you for that part in terms of assessments. So you have a template that I think we'll share in the description link below, and people would be able to leverage that template to be able to assess and evaluate themselves for the year, because I think it's a very, very, very critical tool for people. Because if you're not happy at your job, there's the need for happiness, not laziness, but there's a need for happiness, there's a need for value alignment. And as people get older, and like you said, your job of 3 years ago is not the same person who took that job. So you need to ensure that you are still aligned with that purpose. So alignment, and I hear a lot of alignment. So yes, I think that template is going to help, and then people will be able to do this themselves. Okay, moving on. What are some networking things that people should consider while planning for the new year? And I can give a case in point. When sometimes we have events, my typical approach to going for an event was go for the event, enjoy the event, smile with people, laugh, and go home. But I suddenly learned that it is at the events that the very, very, very senior people in the company are relaxed. Mm-hmm. It is at the events that they are probably having fun, everybody's hair is down, and you can easily go chip in questions. You could even start, as opposed to you sending a Teams or Skype or Slack message or a mail to somebody to mentor you. An event was a very, very good opportunity to walk up to say, I like your style, can you mentor me? Or I like to work with your team one day, which typically you would not get to do so easily in the corporate setting. And then, of course, started learning to take deliberate selfies and pictures with people that mattered. So for me, once I had that realization, I never went for an event casually again. So yes, everybody was in jeans, we were in t-shirts, it was fun time, but I was targeted with subsequent events. I always went in for every event with an agenda. Of course, not aggressive, but there was always an agenda. So I'm meeting here, what am I getting? What am I targeting? So that is one approach to networking from me. But what other things should people consider when they go for an event and or when they want to network for the year? Is it associations? Is it by going to the top MBA schools or Ivy League schools? Or what are things people should consider when going for networking planning in the year?
Okay. So I'll answer this question by first really stepping back and defining what are networks? And then into what is the whole point of networking being the verb, networks being the noun. So I would say like networks are basically they're a set of connections and relationships that made and maintained with a level of intention so that you can achieve what I'll call a mutually beneficial goal. So there's a set of connections and relationships that you make intentionally and maintain intentionally so that both sides of that connection or relationship achieve their own sort of, mutually beneficial goals. And so networking is really just a process through which you build, through which you make those connections, you foster those relationships, and you achieve the said goal together, like collaboratively doing it together. And so networks are powerful. I think we've also sort of maybe slightly bastardized the process of networking, because it's always like, sometimes you feel like networking is just, it's a bit self-serving. It's a bit, for a lot of people, a lot of camps, it's a bit of an uncomfortable process. But I think if we can strip networking back to sort of what I just talked about, it's about connecting with people. It's about building relationships, and it's about maintaining those relationships with an intention that both people are going to get something out of it. So it's not just a give or a take. It's a give and take kind of relationship, and it has to be something that has to be quite intentional. It's not about getting as many business cards in your Rolodex or LinkedIn connections. It's what you do with those connections after you've made them that sort of great importance, right? Because that's what then leads to the results that you would want to have. So beyond just thinking about what can a relationship get me, you should be thinking about what can I give to that relationship as well. So a lot of times I think even approaching networking or the process of connecting with people from a place of service as opposed from a place of what do I want can actually even help. It can place you on a better foot, especially for those who are quite uncomfortable with the process. I think going in there with like just, how can I help this person, or what can I give to this person? And then that would then maybe open up opportunities of how they can also serve you could be quite interesting. And then multiple ways then you make connections really in the world that we're in. And I'll focus on really sort of professional, just thinking about professional networks, because you also have your personal networks, but thinking about professional networks, there are multiplicity of ways you can do that now, right? So a few of them would just in general be like, hey, I want just one-on-one connections, whether it's referrals, a friend of a friend of a friend, we always have that. I think being able to, meet people through other people is a good way it's a tried and tested way, right? I think there's that. There's obviously digital connections. We meet a lot of people online these days. The degrees of separation are no longer 6, is 3. By LinkedIn's algorithms, it's just basically 3 layers of connection. And you can meet really pretty much anyone in the world or be connected to someone who's connected to them. So just leveraging sort of social networks as well. One comment can lead to a full-blown relationship. I've met people online that way, and who are now close relationships, but just started as a like on a post, here and there. Networking events is the one that a lot of people lean into the most. I'm not a big events person. I'm not a big crowd person in general, but I think attending events, networking events are an interesting place, because if you're all at that event, it means that you're generally interested in the same thing, or you're there to learn about the same thing. So we're at least starting from that level playing field, right? If you're in the room, with HR experts or, something about the future of work, you'll probably be meeting, business leaders, people leaders, HR managers, learning and development leaders. You're all coming with the same agenda. And so maybe it makes the conversation, a bit easier. So I think networking events are always a good, place. Myself and Twissy met at a networking event, or an event that then had an opportunity for networking. So I think you can definitely build relationships that way. Then, of course, you have things like affinity networks as well. So if you're in an organization and you have your Black network, women's networks, your project teams, various committees, reading clubs, blah, 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 those are always good places. Again, common interests or common affinity or agenda brings people together in that way. And then, of course, if you do things like volunteering or just interest groups, and the likes, you can, any kind of interest groups, really, volunteering, going to do stuff, church communities, mosque stuff, different things like that. You can build, it's just basically about how what are the various spaces that can make connections. It's how you can really think about how to business and make connections. Now, with regards the question though, and the more important question is, after I've made the connections, what next? Because that's always the place that there are too many connections, right? On LinkedIn, I have almost 10,000 connections. How many of them do I speak to? How many of them do I really foster that relationship with? And so if 2024 is your year for relationships, my key tip for you is really don't leave it at just connecting. Really, really invest the time to turn key connections into relationships. And so, yes, you will have a funnel. You would have a lot of connections, but then you have people who you are intentionally building relationships with. And what that generally tends to then look like is you have to be willing to serve them or serve each other. So support them, support their goals. You know, if they're running a class, show up. If they're doing an event, go there. You know, support them, ask them how you can help them, you know, just be around them, because you're trying to go from the outer courts to the inner courts. So you're trying to go from, you know, the group of, again, 10,000 connections at the top of the funnel to somewhere in the middle, and then to probably just the bottom of the funnel of close connections, right? And so that, again, you have to be selective. It's not everybody you can do that with, but if you have identified that there's a mutually beneficial agenda here, then it's worth investing in, right? So serve them, bring them closer, engage with them, engage with their work, you know, a like, a comment, hey, saw that you're doing this, really cool, you know, all of that type of stuff. It's just engaging with them. Again, you want to stay top of mind. Celebrate them, celebrate birthdays, send a card, send flowers, Christmas, Easter, all of the sort of key things, you know, don't leave them out of the messaging. Again, you want to stay top of mind. That's how you build relationships. You also want to make sure that you are, you know, staying respectful of that relationship as well. You know, don't start calling people at odd hours of the night that don't make sense. You know, show up on time. You know, if you're going to invite them out for, you know, take things out of the digital land, shall we say sometimes, you know, if you're going to take things out of the digital land, make sure it's still respectful, you know, in particular when it comes to cross-gender relationships, even more care needs to be applied, and more wisdom needs to be applied so that things don't get missing in translation. Just things like that. Just don't blur the line. And if you're going to blur the line, make sure you're doing it with mutual consent and all of that. You know, recommend them for opportunities, refer them for opportunities. You know, if something comes up and you can't do it, think about ways you can bring them in. Again, people are always willing to have relationships with people that they know. Like, just think about the human mind. Want to stay close to someone who's going to make me richer. I'm going to stay close to someone who's going to get me closer to information, to opportunities, to, you know, to all the things that I need. And not from a selfish perspective, it's just the way the human mind works. You know, if who would I prioritize? I will prioritize people who are building me and leaning into me and investing in me over those who are just trying to take from me and strip from me. So that's just the way the world works, right? So beyond making connections is really just what are some of the things that you can be doing to stay top of mind for those people, to serve them, but then also create the opportunity for them to serve you. Really activating that relationship with intention, you know, ask opinions, you know, execute on the things. If they give advice, execute on the advice, things like that. Go back, give them feedback. Those are all ways of kind of turning those connections into relationships that then stand the test of time and yield sort of mutually beneficial results. So you're always asking me all these really big questions. And they always seem very simple, but they are loaded. So guys, if you're listening, Tosin is getting all of the goods that people pay thousands of pounds for me to kind of teach and train here. And he's doing it in a very sneaky way. So I see you. He's serving his people. I get it. But yeah, he's getting all good stuff here.
So let's now take a detour, not a detour per se, but it's some things that people don't really talk about. So I'm going to ask you two questions, but one after the other. One is about health and fitness. You are big on health and fitness. I'm going to come back after that to say, once we've spoken about networking, spoken about balancing and evaluating and alignment, at the end of the day, how do we now craft all this into work-life balance? I'll come to that. But for now, what is the place of health and fitness? So we've spoken about our career plans, have a plan for progression and not just promotion. Promotion is included in progression. Have a plan for learning, have a plan for networking. Yes, and how do you now have a plan for fitness? And what are some things one could do?
Ooh, health and fitness is so key. I think I study a lot about the connection between health and productivity in the workplace, right? Ultimately, you cannot add value really to the extent that you want to add value if you're not even in peak performance yourself, right? And so, some of the pillars of peak performance then are, or some of the contributors, shall we say, to peak performance is your, diet, what you eat, your hydration, what you drink, what you eat, healthy food, because all of that, and I don't want to get into the science of it, but there's so much research out there about just, the way your brain function reacts to your diet. There's certain foods that you eat that improve, heart, head, and health, connection, heart and head connection. There are things that increase stamina and increase just longevity, things that don't weigh you down. There's a lot of research about metabolism and high metabolism, slow metabolism. There's a lot to do with, hormonal impacts to your body and things like that. So I think when it comes to just health, I think some of the areas we should be thinking about for both our physical and our mental health, I think that they're two sort of separate but very, very key areas, is really thinking about your food, thinking about your exercise, thinking about your sleep, and also thinking about just what I call supplementation, and also thinking about your hydration. So those kind of areas are like big. I'm really big on that. So just, what am I eating? How am I moving my body? Again, for just strength and just mobility, really. What are you drinking? So water, how much are you drinking? How much sweet stuff is in your diet or in your drinks? Alcohol levels, things like that. So definitely having good liquid in your diet is good. Getting enough sleep. Not a lot of people don't get enough sleep. And that definitely halts brain function. A lot of our thought processes, again, scientifically proven that a lot of our thought processes finish when we are asleep. So if you're constantly awake or you're not getting enough sleep, it means that you are constantly surrounded with incomplete thoughts. And this is the science of it. So just imagine walking around with half-baked thoughts all the time. And all you just need is a good sleep. And if you're listening here, I'm sure you've maybe experienced things where you've really tried to work something out and then you can't, you go to bed, and in the middle of the night, you wake up and you can actually hear the answer. The answer your brain has figured itself out. That's actually the power of having good sleep. It just allows your neurons to finally connect from one side of your brain to the next, and then everything becomes clear of what you need to do, and you can wake up and execute. So having good sleep is just really important. So I think a lot of that really contributes to really solid physical health, and also the first layer of just sort of mental health. I will talk about mental health here because I think it's the most insidious sort of health challenge we're experiencing. It is at a pandemic level at this point, but it's also something that people don't really talk about a lot, especially in our communities. So it's like it seems like, people don't talk about it a lot. We've gone from talking about it from it being a taboo subject to it being something we talk about, to it being something that people think people talk about because they are soft-minded, if that makes sense. So we've kind of gone from across multiple spectrums, but either way, mental health challenges is still one of the number one causes of death in our society today. It is one of the number one causes of workplace failure, of burnout, death by suicide, or what we call sort of giving up effectively. it's such an insidious pandemic and is running through our world. And it's just this point where you are unable to really see the light at the end of the tunnel anymore. You're unable to think yourself through the current situation that you're in. And you think that there's no other pathway, right? You're processing a lot of things. And it's not all people that have mental health challenges that end up in death, but you can end up basically in a position where like the chemicals in your brain are causing a hyperfunction. And again, there are many layers of mental health issues. The point of this podcast is not to go into that, but you can have things that are need to be medically treated, and chemically treated as well. So having to take medication. There's some things that are just more about talking therapies and being able to sort out your thoughts so you can go back to having sort of a normal ability to process information and think through issues. So there are so many different things, but I think just paying attention to your triggers.
To diet, your triggers.
Yeah, paying attention to your triggers, paying attention to what makes you feel tired, what makes you feel confused, what makes you feel weak versus what makes you feel energized. When, just what are the symptoms? Everybody has different symptoms, and it's just knowing what it is for you. Sometimes it might be that you have a splitting headache. That means that you need to just immediately take a load off. Sometimes it's the pain that comes right from the back of your neck. Sometimes it's just the piercing exhaustion. Sometimes it's just inability to focus. So you're doing multiple things and you get confused. So everybody has different triggers. And so know when it's happening to you, know what you need to kick in to do, whether it's stopping, taking a step back, whether it's reaching out to people, whether it is getting, real help, from medically trained professionals, whatever it is, know your triggers and know how to solve it. Because that is one of the biggest issues in productivity, is one of the biggest contributions to workplace absence, in our world right now, is one of the biggest contributions for people leaving the office, is one of the biggest contributors to dips in productivity at work, with people taking long absences just based on health factors. There's so much research out there around just sort of this connection with health and productivity. So it's definitely one to talk about and take care of. Ultimately, you cannot perform your best if you are not your best.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Just of it.
So before we go into the full work-life balance thing, the full-blown one, I have a question on leadership aspirations. Because while people talk about promotion, progression, which is the new term that we've coined today, how can one plan for leadership roles? Typically people get there by working for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and then you become a senior officer, a principal, or a staff engineer, and then a manager, and then what? But is there a way to have a deliberate plan to be there so that you know that you're not just slaving away, but you are actually working with deliberate steps to get you to where you want to be? You can just give a succinct response on that. I hope this isn't big again.
I'm not giving the responses so far. That's my cue to be quick. So, I would first of all say, like, leadership is it's not about a title. It's a state of being more than a state of doing. So you can be a leader without necessarily a title. And in fact, those are the best leaders, right? And so I would say that before even focusing on that leader title, it's almost, do you have a leader's mentality? Do you have a leader's personality? And then I guess you have a leader's productivity. So it's probably one of those those 3 areas, right? So leadership mentality is all about, being curious. It's all about, having a bias towards not always staying in the status quo. So really thinking being able to think about across all elements. So if you're in an organization, even if you're the most junior person, but you're somebody who's constantly thinking, where are the gaps and how can I fill it through my actions. You're already acting as a leader because you're thinking ahead, you're being visionary, you're being strategic, you are, you're problem solving, you are, thinking about your contributions as a potential solution. So that's a leader's mind. That's the first thing. So, and that doesn't require a title, because a title is not going to give you a leader's mind. A leader's mind will give you the title. So it's like sometimes let's not hustle backwards, as I call it. Like, the first thing is to first of all adopt a leader's mind, which would then open up sort of those opportunities for you. So there's that. Then when I then think about what was the second thing I said? So yeah, so your leadership mind and your leadership personality, what does that look like? So leaders don't talk any kind of way. So the leadership personality is about how do you, what's your leadership presence, right? How do you show up? So that, your charisma, how do you dress? How do you appear? How do you communicate? How do you talk to people? How are your thoughts laid out, right? How are your thoughts sort of laid out? It's different when you are, again, a junior member of the team who is very focused on these are the facts and these are the outcomes. Leaders are always thinking more about, yes, these are the facts. This could be the outcomes, but then how do we figure out what's the creativity around this? Or how do we innovate? How do we solve? How do we look around corners? How do we step outside of the box? That's what differentiates, the personality of someone who is, not in a leadership capacity and someone who is in a leadership capacity is what they bring to the table. What they contribute is much more high level. It steps outside of the regular equation and, really thinks about all of the sort of various elements of the organization and then brings it together. And then I guess, yeah, you're what I call it, the productivity or maybe delivery of a leader then is just your ability to not just deliver as yourself, but to deliver with others. So how do you work with people? How do you deliver bigger projects that are beyond your scope? How do you think outside of your own function and think about your place as just one pin in a network of activities, but also knowing that your space is extremely critical. So I usually, when I work with people around leadership, I try to chat around these sort of three areas: is how do you think, how do you think, how do you show up as a leader, and then how do you perform? How do you deliver, beyond yourself and, and having to deliver with other people. So that's the first thing. The title comes when you've mastered sort of these sort of areas. So I would say before really thinking about the promotion and the title and the this and the that is really focus on mastering this piece. Anybody that does this is already seen as a leader, and we've all been in organizations where the person that is most respected is actually not the person with the title, or the person whose voice is most valued is not the manager or there could be a different character because that person has shown all of these other features that are, even more so important. I hope I've answered the question. Yeah, maybe not you expected in a different format.
You answered it in a different way, but truly, like you said, the hood doesn't make the monk. The monk is first of all made in the heart. You are first of all a monk at heart before you wear the cassock and the hood. So literally you're saying before you desire the position, there are things about the personality, which also translates to the perception and charisma at the end of the day. So do you have activity? And I like the way you framed it out. You've said there is the personality, there is the charisma, there is the mindset, and there is the productivity of a leader. So are you able to work in a team? Are you able to get others to do things, not to drive others per se, but to get others to do stuff? Are you able to communicate wisely, not in black and white? In leadership, it's not always black and white. So even when the facts are there, how do you give the bad news in a nice way.
Yeah.
You state the obvious in a gentle way. How do you break the good news or bad news softly, and things like that. So it's good. So your answer was anti. What's the anti word to use? Is it anti whatever it is? But you got it right. Okay, so let's talk about the big work-life balance. Is there anything really, if you want to be a high performer, if you want to get results, is there anything really like work-life balance? First of all,
I think work is life. I think work is a big part of life. Okay. And I think the statement work-life suggests that there's work and there's life. And I think that that's not quite right.
So should we be living our lives at work, or should we be living our lives without work, or how do we handle it?
Life is part of work. So the concept work-life balance is just not something I say or I use. I just think work is part of the life integration. So I think I just talk about life integration.
Okay.
All right. And life integration means the various aspects of my life, which would include work. How am I keeping everything in its place and giving everything its rightful priority? So if I'm thinking about elements of my life, such as my spiritual life, so basically my relationship with God is one piece. My career, or maybe my marketplace pursuits. So my career, my business, my all of that being one other area. My health being one other area. My family being one other area. My friends being one other area. All of these make for a healthy, integrated life where everything, can be productive. Now, can everything be always balanced? I don't think so. I think that there are seasons when you prioritize. I think they're all very important. So everything is important, but not everything can be priority at the same time. Mm. And I think it's just important to think about things that way. Now, before doing that, it's also important to really consider, maybe you may have heard the concept of the glass balls. We all have elements of our life integration that when they break, they are not fixable. And you have other things that can be replaceable, right? So I think it's being able, and that's kind of how you prioritize. If you say my family and my friends, or my family is priority because, hey, if I'm not in the family, it completely changes and dents my family. So I am irreplaceable. And so this is a glass ball to me in this life integration conversation. Maybe that takes number one priority, right, above everything else. So you know that this is the position. If I don't show up as a father, my kids are impacted. If I don't show up as a husband or a wife, my spouse is impacted. So that could be one. You could think about your health. Again, we just talked a lot about productivity. So if you're not your best, nobody gets anything anyway. So maybe that's another layer of priority, nothing can break there. And then so on and so forth. So really think about various areas. You may have heard of something called the Wheel of Life. That's an interesting exercise or activity to do. It sort of shows different, the Wheel of Life shows different areas of integration. But you will notice that every time you do a Wheel of Life, the circle is never straight. It's never one circle. It's always like that, because that just shows that there's always, every year, every season, there are different areas of prioritization. So yeah, I don't even expect balance. I think that's just, I don't expect balance. Balance means we're all on equilibrium and everything is standing on the same level. I don't expect it. It's not realistic. I think based off the first conversation we had is, where are you in this whole thing? What is most important to you right now? We're going back to the beginning. And that was the first question I said, what is most important to you right now? If that is the thing that is most important to you, your life integration is going to skew towards that area.
Gotcha.
So if you want to grow a seven-figure business in 2024, everything is going to have to be thrown at that. Your finances are going to be thrown at that. Your time is going to be thrown at that. Your resources are going to be thrown at that. Everything is going to be thrown at that. Your relationships are going to veer towards that, all of that. And then other things might suffer. Your health might suffer. You may not have the time if you don't include that into your planning. You may not have the time to keep to sort of health disciplines or to eat well. Your travel might suffer. You may not be able to go across the world as you might want to and enjoy and, go on lavish trips and big birthday parties because you're focused on a particular agenda. So all of that dictates. So what you're prioritizing dictates where your integration skews. But that's really how I, and I think some of the practices for me is because I don't expect balance, I just focus on integration. So it means that I'm always ready to travel with my laptop. I'm always ready to take a call in the middle of dinner. Like I'm always ready to mix and match because life is just happening at the same time. I'm always ready to wake up early to go to the gym. I'm always ready to spend my money to get a trainer if I know that trainer is going to be most effective. I'm always ready to have life effectiveness tools like getting a meal service to deliver all my meals or getting a chef to cook all my meals so I don't have to spend the time there and I can spend the time elsewhere. So the moment you're not focusing on balance, where you're focusing on integrating all various elements of your life and then building an efficient system around them, then you're not chasing this sort of elusive balance where you're just thinking about how can I bring the best of myself to the various areas in line with what I am prioritizing. I think it's unrealistic to say this is my priority and then think every other thing is just going to look different. It doesn't really work that way. So so I'm always just about how do I integrate everything and be flexible enough to know that in the next season, things that might have to change and things might have to skew, so that other things also have their day in the sun.
Beautiful. I love that. So integration, life integration, good terminology. Okay, thank you so much. So as we round up, it is the practice on this podcast to challenge our guests. So, and how do we do that? Your predecessor always leaves a challenge for you. So, and what you do about that challenge is that you talk about that challenge, and then you leave a challenge which is in form of a thought for the next person. So one of the first people left a challenge in terms of because of one experience she had, and that was integrity in leadership or integrity in business. And then she handed it over to someone else who picked that up, and that person is in a state whereby she has a plan, and sometimes she's not sure whether the plan is going to work or not. So she has a mantra to say, let's give it an experiment and let's get the right approach to get it to work. So, and her own challenge for you was keep experimenting, so that you keep experimenting till you get the right one, and then you move on to the next one. So what is your perspective about experimenting to get the right solution, and then you give us a challenge for your successor?
So I think that the mindset actually of taking an experimentational, is that the right word, approach is being able to, it gives you freedom to start new things without necessarily the expectation that it's going to go well. Is being able to say, hey, like, okay, let's try this. And at least if I've tried it, now I know for a fact that it works or doesn't work. And I think a lot of times ideas just die at the thought level because we're too afraid to even experiment. So that thing of being able to get something, think about something, experiment, fail fast or succeed fast, whatever it is, it's just, you jump to the next thing. I think I really love that. Because I'm a perfectionist character, experimentation has not been a big part. I feel like I definitely struggle I struggle with, because experimentation can also be very costly. Sometimes it can be costly in time and resources, so it's not always super easy. And if you're somebody who is a risk manager or maybe risk averse character, you don't naturally lean into experimentation because you're always thinking about what can go wrong as opposed to what could go right. So it's a healthy mindset shift or perspective shift that really everything is all about experimenting quickly, proving the hypothesis, proving or disproving the hypothesis and being able to move on. And actually that the cost of staying in inertia is probably more expensive than the cost of just experimenting quickly and moving on.
Beautiful.
I'm able to think about things that way. Like, I'd rather spend £2,000 now, figure out that was the wrong thing, as opposed to wait 12 months of just dilly-dallying, then maybe eventually spend £2,000 and then like, why didn't I just do this before? It's just, all of that. I think is a healthy approach. I really like that.
Beautiful. So what is your challenge for the next person?
My challenge for the next person would be the challenge I have for myself in 2024. And 2024 for me is about always like learning to intentionally respond with competence.
Do you want to expand a bit on that in 30 seconds?
So responding with competence for me is when I have something to do, whether it's something that is, God inspired, self-inspired, or others inspired or requested, that my first go-to is not all the things that can go wrong or all the things that I don't have or why this is going to be difficult or how laborious the process is going to be, because that's will be my own natural, I find one of the things I discovered about myself is I think I lean into that a lot, so for whatever reason. But my 2024 is about, my first response is, it is possible. I can do it. My first response is, yep, somewhere in the middle of all of this, it can be done, so responding with competence and being able to say like, okay, yeah, I haven't quite figured out all the parts yet. I don't know all of the features right now, but I know that there's something inside of me that is competent enough to make that thing happen. And that should be my first response. And then we work out the details, as opposed to trying to immediately work out the details and then talking myself out of it. My first response is, yes, possible, then how?
Beautiful.
And that should always be thinking forward, not pulling myself back. It should always be, how do we get there? Okay, I can't do it. Who can do it? Just moving forward. Everything is thinking forward. So that's like a big challenge. It's a big challenge for me. It's just being an active problem solver in my business and in my life. It's just thinking about how do we do it, as opposed to whether it can be done.
Beautiful. I believe you are already doing that, because in the past few weeks, the projects we've worked on, I've seen the can-do spirit, even though you initially don't agree, but you now learn to go figure it out. So I guess you're very much on the way, and it's a good challenge for the next person. Thank you so much. It's been an exciting journey. Do you have any last words to say after that, or can we close?
Yeah, just 2024 is going to be an amazing year, but it's going to be the year you intentionally make it. That's really the word. Without setting that intention, without doing it's the year of the work. Cool. The year of work. So prepare to do the work and you yield the results of the work.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Today we've had Mosope Adeyemi, a former executive director for risk investments at Goldman Sachs, United Kingdom, on our podcast today. Today, she spoke about career planning, and it has been an exciting one. It's been a really, really deep conversation. And if you're really looking to grow your career in 2024, you should spend the time to listen to this. Of course, you can listen to the GLIT podcast on YouTube, on Spotify, and on any other place where you typically get your podcast to listen to. Until next time when we come your way, please stay tuned and be on the lookout as we bring more exciting challenges to you. And thank you for your support. Thank you for having us here, and see you soon. Bye for now.